Amidst a fierce battle, King Leonidas and his 300 brave Spartan warriors found themselves in a dire situation, completely surrounded by innumerable Persian legions. Like an impenetrable wall, the Spartans steadfastly repelled continuous attacks, holding their shields high, while enemy soldiers crashed upon them in endless waves, much like a relentless storm sweeping everything before them. From the Spartan ranks, spears flew like deadly lightning, mercilessly tearing through their enemies' flesh. However, the enemy's numerical superiority was overwhelming. One by one, the valiant Hellenic warriors began to fall, their bodies littering the scorched earth. Shields cracked and splintered, spears snapped in half, signaling the inevitable end. Leonidas and his handful of Spartans, understanding the inevitability of defeat, retreated to a small hill for their final, desperate stand. In this critical moment, as hope almost faded, a sudden arrow pierced the great king's chest. Leonidas collapsed to the ground, and his noble blood instantly soaked the dust, mingling with that of fallen heroes. This battle, known as the Battle of Thermopylae, was forever etched into the annals of history as one of the most impressive and heroic stands of all time. But how much of what viewers have seen on the big screen and television aligns with actual historical reality? While not everything depicted or written about the Battle of Thermopylae is entirely accurate, some of the true historical facts prove to be even more incredible and astonishing than the most thrilling Hollywood dramatizations. The Persian invasion of Greece was primarily fueled by an insatiable thirst for revenge. Xerxes, the mighty ruler of the vast Persian Empire, could not accept the brutal and humiliating defeat his father's forces suffered at the hands of the Greeks in the legendary Battle of Marathon. His father, Darius, was the master of immense territories stretching from Egypt to western India, yet even he failed to subjugate the freedom-loving Greeks. The inability to triumph over the Hellenes was not only a devastating blow to imperial ambitions but also a shameful, unbearable stain on the entire ruling Persian dynasty. Xerxes was determined to crush Greek defiance once and for all, eradicating their resistance. Exactly 10 years after Darius's failed invasion of Hellenic lands, his son, Xerxes, began planning and executing his own, far more ambitious, military campaign deeper into the western territories. This time, however, the valiant and legendary warriors of Sparta, whose reputation extended far beyond the Peloponnese, joined the impending grand confrontation. The upcoming Battle of Thermopylae, as it later proved, was destined to become an arena of unprecedented bloodshed and widespread devastation, and the heroic resistance of the 300 brave warriors was forever etched into the annals of history, becoming an unforgettable feat. Thus, in 480 BC, Persian King Xerxes, leading his vast armada, began his decisive march towards central Greece, aiming to reach the sacred walls of Athens. At that historical juncture, as the threat loomed over Hellas, many Greek city-states were unfortunately embroiled in continuous internecine wars, weakening their collective strength. However, once alarming news of the impending catastrophe and inevitable demise at the hands of Persian invaders reached Athens, their leaders immediately appealed to all other Greek police with an urgent call to unite efforts and form a single army capable of halting this massive invasion. While the Athenians had previously succeeded in repelling attacks from Darius and his military contingents, this time the situation was far more perilous. Xerxes commanded an army that vastly outnumbered his father's forces. It was truly surprising that Sparta, renowned for its martial spirit, answered Athens' desperate plea for military assistance. Until this pivotal moment, the great city-state of Sparta had consistently chosen to remain neutral, avoiding direct conflicts with the mighty Persian Empire. However, the wise leaders of this great polis recognized that the new threat hanging over their people and sacred land was too vast and perilous to simply ignore. They therefore made a firm decision: the Persian invaders had to be stopped at all costs, regardless of the sacrifices. Intelligence gathered from reconnaissance missions and Eastern allies informed the Greeks of the colossal size of Xerxes' army. Preliminary estimates placed his forces between 100,000 and 300,000 warriors. This formidable military force presented a far more menacing adversary than the one Darius had led 10 years prior. Had the Hellenes been unprepared for such an invasion, it would have inevitably meant the end of their democratic system, and their very way of life. The Spartans recognized that the only path to survival against the impending invasion was the unification of military contingents from all city-states. However, such a mobilization would require significant time. It was decided that the only chance for success lay in significantly delaying Xerxes' army, thereby granting Greece precious time to organize a comprehensive defense. Scouts were immediately dispatched throughout Hellas to locate a strategically advantageous defensive position, a place where the enemy's overwhelming numerical superiority could be neutralized. The atmosphere at the time was extremely tense. Some Greek city-states refused to rally under a common banner, while others openly declared loyalty to the Persian forces and welcomed their new overlords. Nevertheless, Sparta and Athens could not permit a foreign power to strip them of their progress and the precious freedoms their people enjoyed. Ultimately, the scouts returned with a report of a location that perfectly met their objectives. This position was the narrow pass at Thermopylae, which the Persian army would have to traverse to move from northern Greece into its central heartland, where Athens and Sparta lay. Thermopylae was also situated near strategically vital sea routes connecting mainland Greece to the Aegean Sea. This meant that Athens' powerful naval armada could effectively deter Persian ships, thereby preventing enemy landings on the coasts beyond Thermopylae. This arrangement would prevent the Persians from executing a flanking maneuver around the Greek forces in the narrow defile, ensuring that the only access to the heart of Hellas remained overland. This was an ideal strategic defensive position and essentially, the Hellenes' sole chance to significantly slow the relentless advance of the countless Persian armies. However, this location was truly something infernal. The very toponymy of the place, Thermopylae, meaning hot gates, was indicative, as its landscape was abundant with bubbling sulfur springs. Their activity generated an ominous veil of fog that enveloped significant portions of the future battlefield and exuded an unbearable sulfuric stench. It would have been difficult to imagine a more grim and death-presaging location, even if they had deliberately chosen it. Thus, the Hellenes' strategic plan to contain Xerxes began to take tangible shape. Nevertheless, a significant problem loomed over this well-conceived plan. Xerxes' forces were relentlessly approaching, and there was a catastrophic lack of time for the full mobilization and transfer of all combined Greek armies to Thermopylae. Furthermore, a significant number of Hellenic poli still refused to believe in the reality of the impending invasion. The situation was exacerbated by the Persian forces' arrival at the Hot Gates coinciding with the late summer Olympic Games and several other crucial religious festivals. Engrossed in these sacred events, many city-states seemed utterly unconcerned by such a minor circumstance as the approach of a colossal invasion army already at their gates. Sparta, recognizing the urgency of the situation, concluded that further delay, waiting for the rest of Hellas to fully awaken, was unacceptable. Too much was at stake. A military contingent needed to be dispatched immediately to secure the strategically vital Hot Gates Pass, thereby granting other polis precious time to mobilize and organize their armies. After careful analysis of all possible courses of action, the Spartans decided to send one of their 2 kings and a detachment of 300 elite warriors to Thermopylae, to hold this key pass for as long as circumstances permitted. The honor of leading this fateful mission fell to King Leonidas. However, before Leonidas could embark, Sparta, according to ancient tradition, had to consult the Delphic oracle. This consultation was not unusual. The oracle was invariably consulted before any military action and before making critical state decisions. But when the oracle, immersed in prophetic vision, gazed into the future, its prediction brought ominous news to the Spartans. The oracle proclaimed that the Persians would either completely destroy Sparta, or one of the Spartan kings would have to fall. When this grim prophecy reached Leonidas, he showed not the slightest hesitation. On the contrary, he was willing to gladly surrender his life if such a sacrifice could ensure ultimate victory for Sparta. After all necessary consultations with the oracle were completed, Leonidas had to select his 300 warriors and immediately depart for Thermopylae to prepare for the inevitable battle. It is highly probable that Leonidas was well aware that neither he nor his detachment would return alive from this expedition, as he selected only men who already had a male heir to continue their lineage. Spartan warriors, true to their stern code of honor, fought to victory or to death. Given their extremely small numbers and their primary goal, to maximally impede Xerxes' advance, it was evident that none of them expected to return home. Furthermore, Leonidas's decisions were significantly influenced by the oracle's ancient prophecy. According to its ominous prediction, if the king, by some incredible means, could not overcome 100,000-strong army with only 300 Spartans and a small handful of other Greek warriors at his disposal, he was destined to fight to the death to fulfill this prophecy and prevent the polis of Sparta from falling. In light of this, Sparta made every effort to gather as many additional soldiers as possible for this fateful mission from its loyal allies and surrounding territories. The Athenians, whose primary duty was naval defense, could only provide a limited number of ground troops. Thus, upon departing for Thermopylae, Leonidas's force consisted of 300 Spartan hoplites and approximately 7,000 other men, including Athenians, 1,000 Phocians, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebans. These combined forces marched from central Greece directly to the Thermopylae Gorge. Indeed, the stage was fully set for the greatest battle in the annals of ancient history. In late July or early August 480 BC, Leonidas and his army reached the Hot Gates and immediately began constructing defensive fortifications. They managed to arrive several days before the Persians, providing invaluable time for thorough reconnaissance of the area and to ensure every warrior clearly understood their tasks and actions during the impending battle. The Spartans were hardened and experienced warriors, having participated in bloody wars numerous times before. However, unfortunately, the same could not be said for all the soldiers comprising the rest of the resistance forces under Leonidas's command. The pass itself, known as the Hot Gates, stretched approximately 20 to 100 meters wide. Its unique geographical position featured a steep, impassable cliff plunging directly into the sea on one side, and impenetrable, jagged mountain ranges on the other. In such conditions, with 300 Spartans positioned at the vanguard and strategic points along this narrow path, Leonidas was able to effectively hold back the advancing Persian forces. The extreme narrowness of the Hot Gates almost entirely negated Xerxes' colossal numerical superiority over the Greeks and prevented his cavalry from executing a flanking maneuver against the Greek detachments. However, the question remained, would this be enough for Leonidas and his warriors to significantly slow the entire Persian army's advance? Only time would tell. Until this fateful moment, Xerxes and his immense army had advanced virtually unhindered, encountering no significant resistance. They had traversed the vast expanses of the Persian Empire, triumphantly crossed the Dardanelles Strait via two specially constructed pontoon bridges, and then made their way through northern Greece to Thermopylae. While Leonidas patiently awaited the Persian army's approach to the Hot Gates, he prudently dispatched scouts to reconnoiter the area. The situation, it seemed, was unfolding as planned. The Spartans and their allies, calm and confident, were eating and completing their final preparations for the impending battle. However, suddenly, one of the scouts returned to camp in haste and disarray. He brought with him terrible, truly ominous news. A hidden path, winding through the mountainous terrain, led from the presumed Persian troop location directly to the rear of the Greek defensive line. There was a real threat. If the Persians discovered this path, they would be able to outflank the Greeks, inevitably leading to their encirclement and subsequent annihilation. King Leonidas had insufficient warriors to simultaneously repel attacks from both the front and rear of his resistance forces. Recognizing this critical vulnerability, Leonidas made a strategic decision, sending 1,000 Phocians to guard this vital pass in case Persian scouts discovered it. When Xerxes and his enormous army finally reached Thermopylae, he chose to wait 4 days before launching a full-scale attack. One reason for this delay was to allow his Persian troops time to rest and recover after their long march. However, Xerxes also had other, more subtle calculations. He was almost convinced that upon witnessing the countless multitudes of his army, the Greeks would flee in panic. To his great disappointment, this did not happen. The Spartans not only had no intention of surrendering Thermopylae but were also unwavering in their resolve not to let the Persians pass without a fierce battle. After waiting several days in hopes of Greek capitulation, Xerxes ultimately sent an envoy with an ultimatum for Leonidas to lay down his arms. According to the ancient Greek philosopher Plutarch, Leonidas's reply was brief and defiant. "Come and get them!" Xerxes, naturally, viewed this audacious defiance with extreme displeasure and decided it was time to prepare for a decisive battle. Before launching his first attack, he sent scouts to ascertain how the Spartans were preparing for the impending battle. Their report truly shocked the Persian king. The scouts found the Spartans, naked, exercising and combing each other's hair. The reason for such unusual behavior likely stemmed from the Spartans' deep religious and funerary beliefs. Since Spartan warriors were trained to fight to victory or to death, they needed to ensure their bodies were properly prepared for the afterlife. That is why they meticulously groomed each other's hair before battle. Another lesser-known fact concerning the Spartans' appearance was that all Spartan men shaved their upper lip. Like most Greek men of that time, they still wore long beards, but their upper lip invariably remained clean-shaven. Exactly 5 days after arriving at Thermopylae, the great Xerxes ordered his vast forces to begin their assault. He was absolutely convinced that his colossal forces would effortlessly overcome the relatively small Greek contingent, and thus, initially, he committed only his least experienced and prepared soldiers to battle. However, Xerxes quickly realized the full depth of his delusion and the magnitude of his error. The combat effectiveness and training of the Spartans proved truly unsurpassed among all warriors present on the battlefield. The Greek fighters, in turn, had diligently refined their tactics on Thermopylae's rugged and complex terrain for several days before the battle, securing them a significant tactical advantage. They masterfully employed the phalanx, a battle formation that proved exceptionally effective in the narrow space known as the Hot Gates. Greek warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, forming an unbreakable wall of tightly interlocked shields. Wave after wave of Persian soldiers crashed against this monolithic Greek formation, but despite all efforts, it remained unyielding. The phalanx's success stemmed not only from the Greek warriors' high skill but also from their superior weaponry. Greek shields were significantly stronger than Persian ones, and their long spears provided a greater reach, allowing them to keep the enemy at bay. Persian warriors, in contrast, used short javelins and light wicker shields. Undoubtedly, in open battlefield conditions, such equipment offered them an advantage due to increased mobility and speed. However, in the cramped, confined conditions of Thermopylae, this light weaponry proved extremely ineffective against the heavily armored and steadfast Spartans. It seemed that, despite all their desperate attempts and numerous assaults, the Persian forces were unable to breach the Greek front line of defense. The Spartans, displaying extraordinary patience, waited until the Persian warriors massed against their impenetrable shields. Then, using long spears thrust from deep within their dense formation, they methodically destroyed every enemy within range and vulnerable to a precise strike. One can only imagine the terror of a Persian soldier witnessing this carnage, row after row of his comrades falling dead under the onslaught of the invincible Spartan warriors. Each new wave of attack inevitably brought them closer to the deadly phalanx, until a warrior found himself face to face with the impenetrable Greek shields. At his feet lay the lifeless bodies of friends who had fallen in the unequal struggle. In his final moment, he looked up, meeting Leonidas's eyes, as a spear flew from behind the monolithic wall of the phalanx, mercilessly piercing his heart. Unsurprisingly, many Persian soldiers who witnessed this merciless slaughter inflicted by the Spartans eventually fled the battlefield. After many hours of fierce confrontation, the ground was thoroughly soaked with Persian blood, while the Greeks sustained only negligible losses. King Xerxes, realizing the futility of his previous tactics, decided to try a different approach and ordered his archers to unleash a hail of arrows upon the Spartan forces. Unfortunately for the Persians, their arrows proved as useless as their warriors against the strong Greek shields and reliable armor, causing virtually no harm. For 2 days, events unfolded exactly as planned for Leonidas and his valiant army. Even Xerxes' most renowned and elite fighters, known as the Immortals, were unable to break the tenacious resistance of the Spartans and their loyal allies. This special group of warriors earned their unique name from their astonishing ability to instantly replace any losses, creating a deceptive impression among the enemy of their inexhaustible and perpetually full numbers on the battlefield. However, as often happens in the history of warfare, the luck favoring the Greeks was on the verge of inevitable change. It was rumored that in the first 48 hours of fierce fighting, the Spartans and other Greek military formations had annihilated over 10,000 Persian soldiers. Although they had incurred some losses, the overwhelming majority of the Greek forces remained strong, maintaining sufficient morale and physical endurance to continue the battle indefinitely. Xerxes, seated on his luxurious golden throne on a nearby hill, personally observed the battle. He was so stunned and enraged by his troops' continuous defeats that he suddenly leaped from his seat, letting out a cry full of undisguised fury. Such a display of uncontrolled emotion was entirely unbecoming for a ruler whom his numerous followers revered as a deity. Leonidas, his famous 300 Spartan warriors, and the rest of the Greek soldiers had achieved what seemed impossible. They had effectively halted the advance of the giant Persian war machine. On the second day of the Battle of Thermopylae, a local Greek shepherd named Ephialtes sought an audience with Xerxes. He informed the guards that he possessed invaluable information that would allow the Persians to achieve their long-awaited victory over the Spartans. By this point, Xerxes had completely lost all patience. The insurmountable wall of Greek soldiers seemed unyielding, and the emperor was ready to try absolutely any means to succeed. Ephialtes eventually received his audience with Xerxes, and in exchange for a huge sum of money, he revealed to the Persian emperor the existence of the secret Anapeia path. This mountain path wound through impassable mountains and emerged directly behind the Greek defensive line, providing the Persians a unique opportunity for a sudden flanking maneuver. The mighty Xerxes decided to send an elite unit of his immortals to bypass the positions of Leonidas and his valiant warriors. Under the cover of deep night, their detachments stealthily left the Persian camp and began their hidden advance through the winding mountain trails. Approaching the position where 1,000 Phocians, by Leonidas's order, were meant to guard the mountain pass, the immortals swiftly crushed their defense. There is evidence that the Phocians offered little significant resistance. Instead, seized by panic, they fled in disarray upon merely sighting the enemy forces. Regardless, the relentless Persian hordes were steadily approaching the main Greek positions. By a stroke of luck, the alarming news of the enemy's breakthrough reached Leonidas before the Persian vanguard could take the Greeks by surprise. The wise Spartan king immediately ordered his elite warriors and all other Greek contingents to retreat further south, preparing to make their last and decisive stand. However, even before the deadly struggle fully unfolded, Leonidas performed an act that forever etched his name into the annals of world history. Making a difficult decision, Leonidas decreed that all other Greek warriors had the full right to leave the impending battlefield and return to their homelands, to fight for the freedom of Hellas in future conflicts. However, he himself, along with his legendary 300 Spartans, chose to remain and hold back the onslaught of the Persian hordes for as long as possible, taking as many enemy lives as they could before their own valiant lives ended. A small but brave group of Thebans also joined this heroic Spartan contingent. The remaining warriors were instructed to return to their city-states to recount to future generations the immortal tale of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, who dared to defy the mighty Persian king and plunged thousands of his soldiers into chaos. It was believed that through these actions, Leonidas, like an ancient hero, would inevitably fulfill the somber yet magnificent prophecy of the Delphic oracle. At dawn on the third, decisive day of the bloody confrontation at Thermopylae, the great King Leonidas gathered his loyal warriors. Each of them perfectly understood the inevitability of their fate and embraced death with immense readiness for their monarch and for their homeland, Sparta. In that pre-dawn hour, Leonidas, their commander, surveyed each of his warriors, whose faces reflected unwavering resolve, and uttered words that became legend. "Eat a hearty breakfast, for tonight we dine in Hades." Hours later, as the day gained strength, the elite units of the Persian army, known as the Immortals, appeared through the winding mountain pass. Behind them, like an unstoppable wave, countless hordes of Persian soldiers advanced, surging through the narrow, hot gates, towards the outnumbered Spartans. The subsequent events of this epic narrative concerning King Leonidas and his 300 valiant warriors have led to two significantly different historical versions. According to the works of historians Ephorus and Diodorus Siculus, King Leonidas, finding himself in a desperate situation like a dangerous, cornered predator, made a desperate but unpredictable decision. He ordered an attack first. In this dramatic scenario, the Spartan warriors, with incredible fury, stormed the Persian camp, sowing chaos and annihilating a vast number of enemy soldiers before finally being repelled by superior enemy forces. The other viewpoint, presented in the monumental work of Herodotus, asserts that it was the Persians who launched their decisive strike first. However, before commencing this final, devastating assault, intended to utterly destroy the Spartans, Persian King Xerxes performed a ritual sacrifice to the gods in honor of his commanders, seeking divine support for the impending slaughter. The outcome of the subsequent events seemed predetermined, inevitable, and tragic. King Leonidas, along with his loyal warriors, decided to regroup on a vast, open plain. This tactical maneuver was intended to give them better freedom of movement, and most importantly, allow them to inflict maximum damage on the Persian legions. However, as the elite immortals began to encircle them from one side, and Xerxes' other countless forces relentlessly advanced from the other, the Spartans engaged in battle with furious, almost insane ferocity. Their years of rigorous training were not forgotten. On the contrary, each warrior used every available method to break through the dense enemy ranks. When their long spears broke, piercing the bodies of Persian soldiers, and their sturdy shields shattered under the barrage of blows against the immortals' armor, the Spartans instantly drew their short swords, transforming into a whirlwind of destruction, cutting through enemy lines. It was not merely a battle, it was a merciless slaughter. But the Persian numerical superiority was overwhelming. Fewer than 300 Spartans, reinforced by only a handful of other Greek warriors, faced the full might of the colossal Persian army. Xerxes still commanded tens of thousands of seasoned fighters, while for the brave Greeks, there was no hope of reinforcements or external aid. It was in this bloody struggle that Leonidas, the valiant king of Sparta, fell. His devoted warriors, witnessing the death of their leader, immediately closed ranks, surrounding their fallen monarch, and fought off the advancing hordes of enemy soldiers with desperate fury. In an incredible surge of courage, they managed to seize Leonidas's body and, fighting their way through the dense enemy formation, dragged it to a relatively safe location before he finally succumbed to his wounds. At the time of the legendary Battle of Thermopylae, Leonidas was between 50 and 60 years old. He was certainly not a young man, but Spartan warriors, as is known, began their rigorous training in their teenage years and continued to serve in the army until they reached the age of 60. Thus, it is not surprising that even at such a mature age, Leonidas continued to fight on the front lines. The combination of his personal bravery, demonstrated by slaying countless enemies, with his unsurpassed leadership qualities, which allowed him to command all Greek forces at the Battle of Thermopylae, forever cemented his status as one of the most revered and great warriors of all time. Even after the tragic death of their valiant king Leonidas, the few surviving Spartans did not lay down their arms but continued their desperate resistance. They tactically withdrew to a small hill, where they used an improvised defensive wall to effectively slow the unstoppable onslaught of the superior enemy forces. Many of these steadfast warriors had by then lost their primary weapons, swords, shields, and spears, but this did not break their spirit. They continued to fight, battling with their bare hands. For even an unarmed Spartan warrior was a lethally dangerous and unpredictable opponent whose martial prowess and skill did not depend on the presence of a blade or shield. Persian commanders and common soldiers were well aware of this threat. Even after they managed to breach the Spartans' fragile defensive wall and confirm that many of the heroic defenders were unarmed, they did not dare to launch a full-scale assault. In the eyes of every Spartan, the Persian soldiers saw an indomitable resolve that left no doubt any too close approach would likely result in inevitable death. This is why the Persian command decided to choose a less risky, though less glorious, path. Instead of engaging in bloody hand-to-hand combat with these indomitable warriors, they ordered the use of bows and arrows to eliminate the remaining defenders. This choice might have been seen as an act of cowardice. However, given the colossal damage and countless losses the Spartans had inflicted on the Persian forces over the previous 3 days of fighting, their desire to maintain maximum distance from these deadly opponents was entirely understandable. Soon, a veritable hail of arrows rained down on the last Spartans, mercilessly ending the lives of all remaining warriors. After the defiant Spartan resistance was broken, Xerxes was able to move freely across the battlefield, no longer fearing for his life. Unlike Leonidas, he did not share the burdens of battle side by side with his soldiers. Upon the conclusion of the Battle of Thermopylae, Xerxes ordered Leonidas to be decapitated and his body impaled as a warning. As Xerxes and his numerous forces continued their march, Greek citizens discovered the remains of the fallen warriors, including King Leonidas, and honorably buried them directly at Thermopylae. After the bloody Persian wars concluded, an impressive stone monument, shaped like a lion, was erected at the sacred resting place of the 300 Spartans. Engraved upon it were the prophetic words of the eminent poet Simonides. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." This message, in essence, affirmed that the 300 Spartans, who had vowed to fight to their last breath to slow the advance of the massive Persian army, had faithfully fulfilled their promise. It should be noted that a number of Spartan warriors fell in battle even before the final engagement. Furthermore, King Leonidas granted permission for 2 sick Spartans to return home rather than compel them to participate in the final battle. One of them categorically refused to leave the battlefield and shared the fate of the other fallen, while the other, a warrior named Aristodemus, returned to his native Sparta. However, upon setting foot in his city, he was immediately overcome with deep remorse for his decision. From the moment Aristodemus stepped onto Spartan soil, he was completely ostracized by all the city's inhabitants. His act, which consisted of betraying his military duty and abandoning his king in the face of inevitable death on the battlefield, was deemed absolutely unforgivable. For this shameful act, Aristodemus was stripped of all civil rights, condemned to live out his days branded as a coward. However, to his great fortune, this distressing situation did not last too long. The very next year, he was given the chance to rejoin a military campaign against the Persian invaders, this time in the decisive Battle of Plataea. Eyewitness accounts testified that Aristodemus fought with furious, almost insane zeal, driven by a burning desire to atone for the shameful choice he made when he left the Battle of Thermopylae. He plunged into the thick of the fighting, to the front lines, in a surge of wild courage, mercilessly cutting through the disciplined ranks of Persian warriors until, finally, he fell, struck down and killed in battle. There is no doubt that King Leonidas, his 300 Spartan warriors, and the other Greek soldiers who valiantly fought in the legendary Battle of Thermopylae significantly slowed the rapid Persian advance through Greece. However, this heroic struggle had a far more substantial and profound impact on the minds and hearts of the entire Greek population. As the narrative of the 300 warriors' feats spread throughout Hellas, more and more citizens felt it was their sacred duty to defend their homeland. For many, it became not only a matter of honor but also a powerful incentive to avenge the deaths of those 300 Spartans who bravely fell in the Thermopylae Pass. By this point, it became absolutely clear to society that the Persian threat loomed over everyone, and therefore, all who were able to bear arms were obligated to join the fight. The Spartan warriors successfully held back the Persian forces at the Hot Gates for several days, inflicting significant damage both on their numbers and their morale. Persian soldiers who faced Leonidas and his legendary 300 Spartans would long remember their incredible ferocity and deadly effectiveness in combat. As Xerxes' army continued its advance deeper into Greece, it had to confront even more numerous Spartan forces, which undoubtedly instilled deep apprehension in the invaders. The decisive victories at Salamis and Plataea ultimately led to the Greeks being able to finally defeat the invading Persian army and drive it out of their territory. The sacrifice made by the warriors at the Battle of Thermopylae undoubtedly served as a powerful call to arms for many Greeks. Without this heroic resistance, the Persians could well have conquered the rest of Greece and incorporated its territories into their vast empire. Approximately in 440 BC, decades after the conclusion of the Persian Wars, Leonidas's remains were exhumed and solemnly returned to Sparta. His tomb remains to this day at the site where the modern city of Sparta is located, serving as a silent testament to ancient valor.